Hi, and welcome to my February wrap-up. I know it's already mid-March, but February has been overwhelmingly short and busy, so bear with me as I update my reading journal way after the month has ended. I did manage to read 4 books in February and really enjoyed 3 of them, so still pretty happy about February as a reading month. I got to some highly recommended and anticipated books, so let's get started. The first book I finished in February was Shadow and Bone by Hugo. Now, I know I'm very late to the party on this. It's my first time reading the Shadow and Bone trilogy, and I'm happy that I'm finally getting to it. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the books, but if you're not, in the first book we follow the main character Elena, who discovers that she has this special power that has been dormant inside her. And when this is uncovered, she suddenly becomes part of the magical elite and is put under the leadership or care even of the Darkling, who is this very powerful and mysterious Grisha. And that's where the story really starts to unfold. I'm not going to go into more detail about the story itself, but I do want to talk about the writing and the world a bit more. I personally really like the world building. Don't get me wrong, I don't think it's perfect, and there are some things that I'm not so convinced yet, but I had no problem seeing past this because I was really enjoying the story. There's a lot to the world in the magic system, but at the same time, I didn't feel overwhelmed or had a hard time keeping up. I don't read a ton of fantasy, so this is definitely a good entry-level magical world to enter, I would say. There's a lot of setup for the rest of the books to come, and I'm very curious to see where the story goes and to learn more about the world that it's set in. Another thing that I really enjoyed was the political aspect to it. While it was minimal and definitely not necessary to enjoy the story, I appreciated the diplomacy and kind of political and societal structures that became quite clear. I think it makes for a much more interesting setup, and it gives the world a lot more depth. I am not sure how I felt about the romance part of the book. I think I'll wait to decide on that. I was a huge fan. I thought it was a bit cliche and predictable, but I don't want to make any definitive decision just yet. I'll see what I feel when I've read the full trilogy, so these are just my initial thoughts right now. But if there's one thing that I am sure about is that I'll definitely read the next one very soon. It's also getting me more excited about reading more fantasy. So if you have any suggestions for entry-level fantasy with not too intimidating world building, please let me know in the comments down below. I'm really eager on reading more series as well as standalones in the fantasy genre. For the spread, I used light blues and beige. I ended up kind of mixing the visuals from the book and the show, which I ended up watching straight after I read the book. I did already read Six of Crows, which was the main reason why I wanted to watch the show. So the deer is drawn the way it was portrayed in the show because I thought it looked really mystical and cool. And then I drew an outline for the Volcra on the other page. So then on the left, I stacked a book page, beige paper with Shadow and Bone written on it, and then the deer. I made some small doodles around the edges and then used some scrap paper where I wrote a part of the book on for the right corner. On the right, I stacked the light blue paper with a book page and the Volcra outline. Below, I cut out a rectangle and wrote in it the beginning of the book and then some brief thoughts. I framed it with some ornament doodles. Next, I read The Silent Patient, which in the first week of February was everywhere I looked. People seemed to be loving it, and I was not so sure, so I downloaded it on my Kindle to try it out and see if I would like it too. The Silent Patient centers around Alicia Berenson, who is accused of killing her husband. Since her arrest, she has refused to speak and was put into a mental hospital called Grove, where she has been for 6 years when Theo Faber, a psychotherapist, tries to get a job there with the key intention to help her. And he's convinced that he can get her to talk. So definitely an intriguing plot with twists and turns, but unfortunately, I did not end up liking it. I know a lot of people have enjoyed this book, so maybe an unpopular opinion, but it definitely didn't live up to my expectations. Nonetheless, let me start with the positive. I have really come around to the psychological thriller genre. I liked the dark atmosphere, that constant feeling that something is just not quite right. So I felt like that was portrayed quite well, and I also thought that the overall storyline was really interesting. But on the other hand, I did not enjoy the writing at all. The first few chapters, I was pretty close to DNFing this book because the writing was just not my style and the story was off to a very slow start. I did persevere because I heard that the story has a slow start, but people still end up really loving it, and because I'm also just bad at giving up on a book or a show or a movie or anything. I'm quite a completionist. In any case, I kept reading, and yes, the story does pick up, but it still left me feeling quite disappointed. And I think the main reason for that is that the characters, or rather the way the characters were written, I really felt a lack of depth into all of them. They all felt quite flat and inauthentic to me, and I don't mind flawed characters at all, but I felt like I was giving nothing to care or believe anything that any of these characters did or said. And the whole point of trying to guess what really happened or who is telling the truth is not that fun when all the characters just seem very one-dimensional and uninteresting. And when it comes to the writing of the story too, to me there was much more an emphasis on providing the reader with red herrings, that the clues became so very obvious because they just weren't pursued as avenues of possibilities. I can't really get into it more because I want to keep it spoiler free, but my conclusion would be that if you love plot-based psychological thrillers, you might enjoy this book. But if you place high value on characters and are not too keen on the thriller genre in any case, then this one is probably not for you. For the spread, I wanted to keep enough white space for that eerie vibe. I sketched out a chair on a book page, which came out a little wonky, but that's okay. And then I stacked it on top of some craft paper and bits of black paper and notebook paper where I wrote on. On the right side, I wrote out The Silent Patient, and below some of my thoughts on a torn off notebook paper, again stacked on the black paper with some bits and pieces around it. I also finished Night Sky with Exit Wounds by Ocean Vuong this month. If you loved On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous for how raw and honest it was and for its imagery and poetic metaphors, then you will likely enjoy this collection too. I'm relatively new to poetry, and this collection is definitely not an easy read, but I took my time and I did enjoy it. To me, the further along in the collection I got, the more I liked the poems. Some of my favorite ones are Into the Breach and Notebook Fragments. I find it really hard to talk about poetry because I don't know too much about how to discuss it just yet, but I'll say that it's beautifully lyrical, it feels sad and powerful at the same time, it's complicated and very diverse in its topics and pacing and style. For the spread, I started by putting dots all over the left page and then half of the right page. I used a Polaroid stacked on top of some craft paper on the left, and on the right side I used a part of a poem that I wrote on some notebook paper and also wrote the title. Finally, I read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Now, I was very, very reluctant to read this, or to be honest, anything by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I know she's very loved, but I'm not particularly interested in celebrity life, and so I thought that her books would just not be my thing. I had no interest to read this book whatsoever, but BookTube has praised this book like no other, and I think it's my top recommended book. And so when I saw it in the bookstore the other day, I just went for it. It was an impulse buy for sure. So I was worried that I wouldn't like it, but I could not have been more wrong. I absolutely loved this book. The writing, the story, the characters, the atmosphere, it was all really on point. In case you haven't heard much about it, the story starts off with this young journalist who is, for some reason, requested to do the cover story on Evelyn Hugo, one of the biggest Hollywood stars of all time. No one's really sure why, but Evelyn insists on Monique doing this piece. And soon Evelyn reveals to Monique that she doesn't want to do a cover piece, she actually wants her to write her autobiography. She wants it to be real, the good, the bad, the ugly, all her secrets and intricate details of her life, and with that, her 7 romances revealed. I found it really amazing how the author tells such a complex story, unravels all of these characters in such a short book without making it dense or overwhelming with facts. It's an easy and fast read, but it's so rich with stories and lessons about life and morality. It's beautiful and tragic, and I loved every minute of it. I annotated the hell out of this book, and I'll definitely be returning to it. So yeah, I could not have been more wrong. I would highly recommend it, especially if you're feeling unsure. For the spread, I wrote out the title on brown paper with a red outline. I cut out rounds of the edges and then included on top of some book pages. On the right side, I cut out a circle of the same brown paper and then created an outline of Evelyn Hugo with green and floral paper and book pages. Under it, I wrote one of my favorite quotes and a short review. The quote I picked was, "Sometimes reality comes crashing down on you. Other times, reality simply waits patiently for you to run out of the energy it takes to deny it." So that is it for this month. I hope you enjoyed the spreads. Let me know in the comments down below what you read last month. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching and have a nice day.